We're going to continue our series on antidepressants. So we're going to start off with Wellbutrin. Wellbutrin is an atypical antidepressant. It's not a normal antidepressant. It is an NDRI. And if you watch the last part, you'll kind of have an idea of what that does, given what the definition is here. It's used to help people stop smoking. And it's a popular add-on medication, which means that if you have a hard time responding to a drug or just don't respond at all, Wellbutrin can be given to kind of help in the resolution of your symptoms. Because it acts at different places in your body than the other medications, it's usually more tolerable and there's less side effects like sexual dysfunction, things like that. It's also used with naltrexone for weight loss, which is interesting. The adverse effects can be insomnia, nausea, constipation, anxiety, and sweating. Overall, it seems to be more tolerated than other drugs. Next is Lamotrigine. Lamotrigine is interesting because it is an anti-epileptic drug that's used for seizures, but it's also used for bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is a mood disorder that's characterized of feelings of feeling up. Another word for it is mania. So energized, lack of a need to sleep, you're joyful, you feel like you can conquer the world. It's a very interesting state of mind. And then, after a certain period of time, you could start to feel depressed, low mood, hopeless. So your mood is swinging from one extreme to another extreme, and that happens over the course of time. So it's not a feel happy then sad, then happy then sad. It's you have this up feeling for a certain amount of time, and then you have that down feeling. And so bipolar is just a swinging of those moods. Lamotrigine is very well tolerated. It has a very low side effect profile. So overall, it's a pretty good drug to take when it's given in the proper situation. The dosage is very flexible and tolerated. It's not fully understood how it works, but it works pretty well. So let's get into some of the research. So the efficacy, how well do these things work? So the couple questions we want to answer. How effective are these drugs? How effective they are at relapse of symptoms, at resolution of symptoms. That's really important. And then are they worth the risk? We spoke about in part 1 the adverse effects. Are the benefits of these drugs worth the adverse effect risk? So we know we have adverse effects, serious adverse effects. We just spoke about risk versus reward. This information I got from various sources and I will post them in the description. It's difficult to predict what will work or not. So if you're given a medication, the doctor's going to choose one they think will work and is tolerable, and depending on what happens, they could change the dosage, change the medication, add another medication. It really depends on how you respond because it's not known what your biology is and how you're going to respond to a drug. So if you're considering taking a drug or have taken a drug, that's the whole approach. But you're obviously monitored and hopefully you're in communication with your doctor. In a conglomeration of studies, certain sources say that the placebo group, the group of people that just took a fake drug, like a sugar pill or something, 24 to 40 out of 100 people had a resolution of symptoms within 6 to 8 weeks. So you have a group of people that they're given one drug, they don't know what it is. Another group is given another drug, they don't know what it is. One group has the actual drug, one group has a fake drug. So in the fake drug group, we saw some improvement. In the real drug group, there's more improvement, 40 to 60 out of 100. All of this takes place in the span of 6 to 8 weeks. We spoke about relapse. So with relapse rates, in the placebo group, 50 out of 100 people relapsed. In the antidepressant group, about 23 out of 100. Again, this is data studied on average across a bunch of different research studies. They studied tricyclic antidepressants, which we didn't really talk about, SSRIs, SNRIs. They're a collection of data from multiple studies. And then severe depression, in some studies, it shows that severe depression is benefited more by antidepressants. And as I mentioned before, the data is spread out. So these conclusions are very general. They don't have a bunch of different research studies studying one specific drug all the time. To make a good analysis, you got to study them as a whole and see what data came out of those studies. So some critiques. Who do you treat? In general, with depression, you need a mild, moderate, and severe. So everyone has a different situation. Some people might go to a psychiatrist and be severely depressed. Some might be moderately depressed. The question is, are antidepressants effective for all of these groups? Across the studies that at least I saw, effectiveness varied and the severity varied. So there's a lot of things that are up in the air. Another question is, how long do you treat? These studies lasted between 4 to 8 weeks. That's not a real world data set. It's very short term, and there's not a lot of long-term follow-up studies. So if you're trying to assess the efficacy or the effectiveness of a drug and you're only doing it in a couple of months, that's really hard to do. So number 3, the harms. There's not a lot of studies on the long-term adverse effects. A lot of it is short-term data just to see how well the drug works. Some patients have shown to have side effects that last days to weeks after stopping the treatment. But in general, because the studies are so short, that really limits how effective they are in the real world. And you don't have a lot of studies that just study the adverse effects. This is very important right here. It's been shown in research that industry-sponsored studies, like big pharmaceutical company-sponsored studies, oftentimes have more favorable results. Research also shows that these industry-sponsored studies are 22 times more likely to have favorable results. In a meta-analysis, or a research study that studies a bunch of different research studies, 30 to 40 of these studies were high risk for a for-profit bias, which means that because of the nature of who sponsored the study and the way it was run, 39 of these are more likely to have a bias because they could make the company or the entity a lot of money. Research has shown consistently that drugs put on the market who have the potential to make a lot of money are more likely to have data that leans in the company's favor. A lot of these studies are very short. Because they're very short, the adverse effects across time are oftentimes not well studied and understood. We know that long-term use in some studies shows sexual dysfunction, GI upset, gastrointestinal upset, sleep problems. There are studies that show pregnancy risk, birth defects in women who take antidepressants while pregnant. But that's not a huge data set. Because of these short-term studies and all the different factors, adverse effects might be underestimated. Withdrawal is also very important. Some people have stated it lasts a few days for a few months. This can affect the discontinuation rate of the study. So if you have a study, they're trying to also see how many people dropped out. If someone drops out because they experience heavy withdrawal, they're more likely to get back on the drug to relieve those withdrawal symptoms. And that can mess up the data from the research study. As far as children, 2010 to 2018, you had 60% of kids responded well to placebo and 65% responded well to drug. So that's not a huge benefit for the drug groups, only a 5% difference. 1972 to 2007, the average placebo response rate was 50%. So in all those studies, 50% of the time, the children responded well to a fake drug. These studies were 8 to 12 weeks. There's no significant benefit that's been shown in children, marginal for adolescents. Overall, it doesn't seem like antidepressants really work in kids. Those more likely to relapse were female with chronic depression, who were more likely suicidal, who had other conditions like anxiety, behavior issues, etc. So let's go through the summary and close out on this series. First, we talked about Wellbutrin. It's used as an add-on medication. It's a very successful add-on medication. It's pretty well tolerated, and it's a part of the arsenal of drugs that a physician can use to help someone who might not respond to a mainline antidepressant. Then we have Lamotrigine, which is used for epilepsy and bipolar disorder. It helps stabilize the mood. It's very well tolerated. It has a low side effect profile. The dosage is very flexible. Overall, it's a pretty good drug to take if you suffer from a mood disorder like bipolar disorder. And then we ask some questions. How effective are these drugs, and are they worth the risk? We learned that taking these medications is complicated. You might expect to change the medication, dosage, adding another drug. Studies show that antidepressants helped a little bit more people than those who took placebo in a collection of a bunch of studies. We also learned that there's a higher relapse rate in people who take placebo versus the actual antidepressant in a collection of certain studies. But we also learned that this information is very general. It's data collected from a bunch of different studies with a bunch of different antidepressants in a bunch of different types of situations. We got into some critiques. These studies are very short in length, and there's a very real bias because of industry-sponsored studies. Companies who can make a lot of money are more likely to put out drugs that, have side effects that can favor their shareholders. Because in the end of the day, a lot of this stuff is about money. So you might have studies that can be interpreted in ways that can help the drug get put out and make money. We then closed out and talked about some of the effects of long-term use, the pregnancy effects, the withdrawal symptoms, the fact that adverse events could be underestimated. And then we talked about how, in general, it seems like kids and adolescents do not respond well to antidepressants. There's not really much benefit. Overall, in my opinion, it's really up for debate how beneficial these drugs are. It takes a lot of playing around to see if they are effective. I'm not a physician. I'm not saying don't take antidepressants. What I'm saying is that we have to consider the evidence and the data that's available to us. So overall, we're seeing that the idea of antidepressants being extremely effective, it's not really cut and dry. You can make good arguments for it being relatively successful, but you can also make good arguments for there being a lot of holes in these research studies that might underestimate the adverse effects and skew how effective these drugs actually are. This whole series was just here to kind of give you guys some stuff to work with. I hope it was very helpful. I learned a lot that I didn't know, especially doing this research on the research. So I hope this data was helpful. I hope you stuck around. I know it wasn't the most exciting thing, but I think it's important to get a decent general understanding of what's out there and why there's controversy. So that's all I got. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell your friends, and I'll be back soon with another video.